Hello everyone, welcome to the eDataSource Objects webinar. I'm Zach Asham and I'm going to be leading you through all of these slides. So we're going to begin here with the email object. This is actually the starting point of the parsing process. And this is just an object that represents our emails that contain the receipts we'll be parsing. We want to focus on two fields, the HTML body and the text body. We actually prefer the HTML body for parsing just because it is well formed, and as you know, we have all those HTML tags that we can use to our disposal to search the document. The text body is a good backup though in case there isn't an HTML body present or it isn't as well formed as we'd like. We'll actually start by passing the HTML body to JSoup or the document navigator, whichever you choose to use. And actually, for example, when we pass it into the document navigator constructor here, we're passing the HTML, but JSoup ends up being used in the document navigator. So if you will be using the document navigator, you'll just want to bypass this step of parsing it with JSoup because that will be done for you. So to start off, I just wanted to mention for the coming slides, a good way to think of the receipt classes is to position them in a tree hierarchy in your head, where the sub-receipt types extend the base receipt class. And really, we are just going to be worrying about two main classes here, the Ecommerce Receipt and the Abstract Subscription Receipt. And right here is the diagram for the e-commerce structure, which you will also get a look at later. Now we are going to go into the receipt class with a little bit more depth. This is our main object that gets stored every time a successful email is parsed, along with another e-commerce or subscription receipt. Parsers don't really need to worry about populating this object, mostly because a lot of these fields are done automatically in the vast majority of cases. The two we need to worry about the most are the receipt type and the receipt subtype. The receipt type gets set through the type of parser we're using, which is why it is important to select that carefully. Selection is fairly simple though, in that most parsers we will be writing in our e-commerce, and those that are subscription are obvious as well, such as Netflix or Amazon Prime. The receipt subtype needs to be changed if the e-commerce receipt is a store receipt as opposed to online. So that would be in the case where the user went actually in person to the store and they just emailed the receipt instead of printing it out for them. So in that case, we would override the default to be in store. Now we're taking a look at the e-commerce receipt, which extends receipt. All the totals from the email get stored on this object. So as you can see, we have the subtotal, discount, credit, total, tax, and fees. In another webinar, we will be covering how these values work together to make a balanced e-commerce receipt. We also have the order number and billing address, both of which are pretty self-explanatory. But I did want to go into the shipping address and shipping about, both which are present here in this object, but we should actually be storing these on the individual sub-shipments. This is just because in some cases we have different shipping addresses for each shipment, or the shipping amount needs to be divided among multiple shipments. Only in the case where we have a shipping amount that doesn't divide evenly should we be setting the shipping amount on this base receipt object. Down that road a bit more, when we are adding shipments to the e-commerce receipt, you should keep in mind to use the add shipment method as opposed to creating your own array list of e-commerce shipments and then calling set shipments. This is just because when you call add shipment, the method does the work of setting the receipt field to the receipt you are adding the shipment to. And finally, the totals balance column is defaulted to true, and you won't really need to worry about changing that from its default state to false ever, but if you will, it will be pretty clear. Next up, we have the e-commerce shipment, which does not extend Ecommerce Receipt, but it does have a one-to-many relationship. That means we can have an Ecommerce Receipt with more than one Ecommerce shipment. Again, that relationship highlights why we will actually want to store the shipping address on this object as opposed to the receipt. So if we have multiple shipments, they can each have their own shipping address. Shipping amount and shipping method are both sparsely populated, and what I mean by that is if there's no mention of either or both of those in the email, we should just leave them as null. If there is a shipping method, however, we do have the option of either storing the exact string that's mentioned, or we can use the common shipping methods. There's 3 of them, and it's just an enum value that gets converted to a string. Another point to mention is the delivery dates. There's actually 4 of them. They're also sparsely populated, and a good reference for that is the parser_util.getDate method, which will get covered in another webinar. Finally, I just wanted to mention just how we're using the add shipment method in Ecommerce Receipt. We are similarly going to want to use the add item method here as opposed to set items with your own array. This is just to ensure that the shipment field sets the correct e-commerce shipment to all of the e-commerce items you will be adding to the shipment. We're moving down the tree here to the e-commerce item next. This falls below the e-commerce shipment, but it doesn't extend it similarly to the relationship between the shipment and the receipt. There's also a one-to-many relationship, so we can have multiple e-commerce items to one e-commerce shipment. I didn't mention seller over here on the slides, but I did want to mention it's defaulted to null here, and in most cases we aren't going to have a seller in the receipt, so you'll just want to leave that as is. The quantity should always be populated. I know it's defaulted to null over here, but if there's no mention in the receipt, we'll actually want to override that to 1. The description and the amount will actually always almost be populated, and there's usually a mention of that in the receipt, but if there isn't, we will have an explicit case to highlight that. And once again, I just wanted to show this diagram. This shows from the Ecommerce receipt all the way down to the item, and as you can see, it's a one-to-many for the receipt to the shipment, and it's a one-to-many for the shipment to the item. So this is going to be a nested tree if you end up with multiple e-commerce shipments to one receipt. We're going to start moving away from the e-commerce receipt, e-commerce shipment, and e-commerce items now onto the abstract subscription receipt. And this is just an abstract class that encompasses the other receipts in our data. And these ones are a little bit simpler than the e-commerce data in the fact that we only really have 4 fields to worry about here. We have the category, which is an enum, and I'm going to actually go into that when we talk about implementations of this abstract class. The details, data 1 and data 2, are going to vary a lot on a parser-to-parser and company-to-company basis. But just as an example, we could have an account update for our category, and the details we could fill in a string as your plan change, and data 1 and data 2 could, for example, be the price of the new plan and just a description of the plan. So maybe for Netflix, it would be 1 DVD out at a time. And that would just be a good example of how we would populate these, but they actually vary a lot on a company-to-company and parser-to-parser basis. Now we're going to take a look at the 2 concrete classes that implement abstract subscription receipt. Let's just start by taking a quick look at the diagram here of the hierarchy. As you can see, the online subscription and video rental subscription fall below the abstract class, which in turn extends receipt. For video rental subscriptions, I think Netflix is a good example. This is just because we have many different categories that we store for them. For these subscriptions, like I said, it's an enum value which is implemented with these, As you can see, we store free trial emails, account update emails, DVD rentals, and cancellation emails, among more. The online subscription is pretty similar. It's just implementing this enum value differently. A good example for these would be Amazon Prime. That's just because they have a purely online subscription model for that service, and as you can see, they're pretty much the same. It's just for a different subscription model. And with that, I think I've covered all the data definitions and classes you'll need in your tool set and to start writing some parsers. Thanks for watching my webinar. I'm Zach Asham.